What is up, my bloomin' nerds? Okay, I'm gonna proceed to read this book. We left off on page 18. If y'all have the same kind of book as me. If not, this is sad. Hope you're following along. If not, you're just listening to me read. Jean Smith had married for the first time in her mid-teens and had teenage girls of her own before she knew it. Sometimes she clashed with Kathy, Sheila, and Carrie, especially Carrie. Jean had incipient diabetes, a disease that would have more and more impact on her life. She had been married to 3 different men over more than 3 decades, and finally she had found the right one. Endlessly raising children wore her down. She wanted time to live peacefully with Dawn and work on her handicraft hobbies, making her exquisite dolls and ceramics. The Smiths bought a big old house in Salem at 1515 Liberty Inn E, and Jean opened a doll shop in the detached garage. She made them herself, starting with the molds. They were delicate works of art. She taught doll classes too, and attracted eager students. Working with fine fabrics, lace, paint, and wigs, Jean created dolls that were much sought after. She and Dawn hoped someday to be able to travel as well. By the time Sheila was a senior in high school, Jean was ready for her older daughters to be on their own. And the more they defied her, as all teenage girls defy their mothers, the more ready she was. As for Dawn, he wanted whatever Jean wanted. She was the only one who always spoke her mind vehemently. Make that the word of the day. And Dawn was the placater? One of those two. His calmness was the reverse of her emotional intensity, and their marriage worked despite that, or more likely because of that. Kathy moved out first, married, and had 2 children. Sheila took a business course after high school at Chemeketa Community College in Salem, and found a job with one of the top law firms with the best criminal defense attorneys in town. Brown, Burt, Swanson, Lathan, Alexander, and McCann. Still intended to go back to college and get a 4-year degree, even though she loved her job. She still intended to go back to college and get a 4-year degree, even though she loved her job. She might even go to law school herself. Sheila's firm was deeply involved in a case that had national coverage in 1978 because of its landmark implications. Could a husband rape his own wife? The Greta Rideout versus John Rideout case sought to prove that a man could indeed be held criminally responsible for forcing himself on his legal wife against her will. John Rideout was acquitted, but the story spawned an intense movie starring Linda Hamilton, and when Sheila read the files, she found the question compelling. Sheila proved very adept at handling the details in a law firm, and her bosses liked her. Carrie sometimes visited Sheila at work and was so impressed by the way Sheila answered the phone that she, too, memorized the firm name just the way Sheila said it. Brown, Burt Swanson, Lathan, Alexander, and McCann. Oh, oh, it's all one word. Almost 2 decades later, she could rattle the names off at will. Sheila always had interesting stories to tell about things that happened at work. Of course, a lot of cases were run-of-the-mill, but there were other clients besides John Rideout whose faces were familiar because of blanket coverage in the newspapers and television. One day, a muscular and handsome former star athlete named Randy Woodfield was brought through the waiting room at the law firm where Sheila worked. Carrie recalled that he made Sheila's skin crawl. Randy Woodfield was the I-5 killer. Yeah, there's a thing. The I-5 Killer by Ann Rule, published 1984. The case of a serial killer and rapist along Interstate 5 in the Northwest. In case you didn't know who that was. I didn't know. I was never taught that or told about it. Whew. Well then, Randy Woodfield was the I-5 killer and was arrested for shooting 2 women in Salem and a bunch of rapes in California, Oregon, and Washington. Sheila said he was very nice looking, but he gave her the creeps. Always listen to your gut, people. Although she wanted to get her 4-year degree, Sheila had long had dreams of finding the love of her life, just as her mother had. She was fascinated with the law for its own sake, but she also thought it might pave the way for the kind of life she envisioned. She didn't mind working hard, but she longed for romantic love and wanted to have a husband someday who made her more than just a comfortable living. But she was young and in no tearing hurry because she had college in her future. Sheila always loved glamour, Carrie said. She wanted to be glamorous and live a glamorous life. But she wasn't really very sophisticated. Every once in a while, she'd get us both dolled up and have us pose for a professional photographer as if we were models. But that wasn't the real Sheila. It's hard to describe, but there was always something about Sheila that just drew people to her. It didn't matter if she was all fixed up or if her hair was a mess and didn't have any makeup on. People noticed her and wanted to be around her. It was almost as if she was a magnet. She was happy and sparkling and fun to be with. Sheila always wanted a home and children. When she met Alan, she was only 18, and he seemed like the ideal man. He did indeed, only the timing was wrong. If Sheila let herself fall in love with him, it would mean she would have to forgo college. But Alan Van Hout? Thinking it's Hout. That's how I'll be saying it for the rest of the book. Good luck. But Alan Van Hout had worked hard to create an image that almost any young woman would find appealing. He was still a work in progress. When Sheila met Alan in the law office where she worked, she was instantly attracted to him. It was the fall of 1982, and Sheila had been out of high school only a year. She was as small as a child, but her figure was perfect, and she had long blonde hair and a beautiful face with gentian blue eyes and a leftover sprinkling of freckles on her nose. She looked up at the man that her boss was introducing to her and felt her heart lose its rhythm for an instant. Alan Van Hout was a client. Her boss had handled his divorce. Alan didn't mention which divorce, and Sheila assumed he had been married only once. He was 6'2" and as handsome as a movie star, at least to Sheila. He had a thick mop of almost black hair and compelling brown eyes. Alan dressed impeccably, and Sheila had the distinct impression that he was a very successful businessman, even though he was only 27. Of course, she said yes when he asked her out. Alan knew all the best places to go in Salem, and he dropped names of exclusive country clubs and upscale restaurants where she had never been. He showed her his stereo store, and Sheila was impressed. He explained that he'd been forced to go through bankruptcy because his ex-wife Mary had taken him to the cleaners. But he was really only reorganizing, and she shouldn't worry about it. His divorce appeared to have been devastating to Alan. He was very sad when he spoke of his failed marriage. Mary had 2 children by a former husband when she wed Alan, and he told Sheila that he tried so hard to be a good father to them, but his efforts were never enough for Mary. She took everything they had in the divorce, even our house. Sheila knew very little about Alan. He said that he was a native Oregonian. It's like that moment in Anchorman where it was all like San Diegans. It's like, okay, I don't have Ron Burgundy here with me. I'm sorry. Oregonian. Just gonna go with it. But revealed almost nothing about his early life. She assumed she would learn more when he began to feel totally comfortable and trusting with her. Now, on his own, he seemed to be a man who lived in the moment. After what he had been through, she could understand that he was hurt and hesitant to confide in anyone. He was rebounding from the pain. Alan didn't want to dwell on the past, and he seemed to make his life up as he went along. He wanted to have fun, and he could be hilarious with his wit. Sheila found in Alan all the glamour she had longed for. She was madly in love despite what he had been through. Alan was charming and funny and loving. By their 3rd date, Sheila knew she was going to marry him. He didn't even need to propose. It was a given that they would be together. She could hardly wait to be Mrs. William Allen Van Hout. Jean was in her late 40s and, oh my gosh, it likes to hop from place to place. That is my commentary for this. It keeps on hopping from place to place, and it's hurting my brain. Jean was in her late 40s and Don Smith in his mid-50s when Sheila met Alan. They were very impressed with him too. Oh, never mind then. It didn't really switch. Every other time it did. He seemed to be everything they could hope for in a possible son-in-law. He was full of plans, and he was more than willing to include them, as he expanded his business options. Yes, he told them frankly he had just filed for bankruptcy, but he hadn't lost his stereo store in his divorce, and he knew he could make it work. When Alan spoke about big business and franchises and making millions of dollars, Jean and Dawn had no doubt he was going to do it. Alan explained that Capital Hi-Fi and video rental was really very successful. He had a great location in Pringle Park Plaza, the PPP. The small mall next to the Salem Public Library and the Salem Police Headquarters. And that was only his flagship store. If he had moved ahead with his plans for expansion, he promised the Smiths that he would offer them a share of the business. Since Alan had lost his home in the Ironwood area of South Salem when Mary took it in the divorce, Dawn and Jean suggested that he might as well move into their house. Home. Their home. He and Sheila were planning their wedding, and there was no reason he should be paying rent somewhere when they had plenty of room. Dawn and Jean were doing well financially, and their credit was excellent. Dawn had a great job at Furrows, a building supply company, as well as his pension from the Air Force. They could well afford to invest in Alan's store. He told my folks that he wanted a mom and dad, something he'd never really had. That rhymes. Dad, Carrie said. He said he loved his grandparents on his mother's side, but that wasn't the same. He wanted to be my parents' son. He would give them a 49% share in his renamed Stereo World, and he would keep 51%. That would protect them, Alan pointed out, as he would be the one taking on all the risk. As the major stockholder, he would be responsible for all debts. Jean and Dawn eagerly agreed to invest in Stereo World. They used the substantial equity they had in their home to open a line of credit for themselves and for Alan at the Commercial Bank in Salem. Any of the three of them could use that line of credit. The building boom had hit a slump, and Dawn's new job didn't have quite the opportunities that he'd had in his own business, but he was doing all right. Still, the chance to join in Alan's enterprises had come at just the right time. Alan was like another son to Jean and Dawn. Jean looked at him and saw a resemblance to her lost boy Donnie. He was dark and handsome the way Donnie had been, and she felt motherly toward him. But Alan couldn't handle you loving him, Jean said. He got nervous if I showed him any affection. Alan told Dawn that he had been a serviceman too, and that gave them a bond. He said he was a second lieutenant in the army, Dawn recalled, after his being in the ROTC. Oh, that's rocked or something. It's a club in college for people who are planning to go into the military and stuff. My English teacher taught me that. After his being in the, I'm just gonna say ROTC for now, at Stanford. That's where he said his college degree was from. The Smiths gave Alan carte blanche to use their vehicles and Dawn's boats. He was practically a member of the family, and Sheila was so happy about marrying him. She was making plans for a beautiful ceremony in the Methodist Church in Salem. Carrie tried to be happy for Sheila, but she was the one member of the family who didn't think Alan was such a great catch. There's something about him that frightened her, something more than how mean he was when he teased her. But she didn't say anything. She knew that nobody was going to listen to a teenage girl's opinion. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So we're at chapter 3 for next time. Because 20 minutes, that seems like an ideal time. Especially because now I'm adding commentary. Okay. So, you can subscribe, like, or even dislike. I don't take it personal. I know some people won't like this because nothing's gonna please everyone. So, yeah. You can subscribe, like, or even dislike. And it's the end of the video. You know what that means. I'm gonna do a little awkward dance. This is a nerd dance. It's just me being dorky. Oh, the music, it totally works. So, since it's the end of the video, PCs, goodbye nerds.